Hello everyone, this is Scarzig. Today I wanted to talk about Saberspine Tiger. This card has been linked to several imbalanced shenanigans throughout the lifespan of Duelyst. And due to recent developments in the meta, right, I've kind of been able to pin down my opinion about this card. This video, I guess you could say, has been a long time in the making because I've had, thoughts and opinions about this card for a while and just haven't really, put them down in video form, or at one point I was even going to write like a super long article about this card. But anyway, why does this card exist? Like I said, it's been the source of a lot of headaches for a while and linked to several mechanics throughout the game, mostly involving buffs. And that's that's the main issue with this card. But why is it in the game in the first place? It's important to note Saberspine Tiger is a neutral basic card. That means that every player in the game has 3 copies of this card. It's a basic card, you get it for free. And it's really important for that to be in the game because Saberspine Tiger will give newer players, or not, or players playing on a budget, a strong removal, or I should even say a passable removal or burst tool. If new players didn't really have access to any sort of removal or burst, their games would get steamrolled a lot more, where they wouldn't be able to deal with very threatening units as well, things that you don't want to have stick around. I'll talk about that a little bit later because Saberspine Tiger specifically punishes minions that you don't want to stick around on the board. But it also gives them some sort of burst removal. A lot of basic budget strategies are based around, just simple playing well, buffing stuff, and, getting that last hit in. Typically speaking, games of Duelyst end by bursting your opponent down from anywhere in the neighborhood of 10 HP, right? And it really depends on the faction, how much reach they have, how much burst they have, and board setups, etc. But generally, that's a good break point. And so Saberspine Tiger gets to kind of soften that up a little bit. If without that burst, new players would also find it very difficult to close games out, and you would find it where games would just stretch into super high mana costs, and then you have whoever drops like a Storm Metal Golem or something, right, finishes the game. Or if a newer player goes up against somebody who's not playing as budgeted a deck, something a bit more expensive, something a bit more refined, then they keep getting bursted by cards and combos they don't have, right? Because it would be like everybody else has burst finishers except for new players. So again, this is just a really great tool that everybody has access to. New players can make decent use out of it, and it serves its purpose. And then more experienced players with larger collections. Excuse me, wow, really stumbling over that word. Larger collections, can make more advanced use of this card with some combos and things like that. Now, the main issue with this card, and the reason it's kind of come back into the discussion spotlight, and I do like how the Duelyst community, the discussions sort of run on a cycle. You can kind of sometimes predict what's going to come back into the discussion spotlight depending on tournament results or what's in the meta. But anyway, Saberspine Tiger has been getting a lot of value lately because the developers have started to introduce more minions that have strong effects, and they balance them having such strong effects or threat potential to your opponent by giving them really low base attack. I have a very short form list here to give some examples. Heartseeker is a really great one. It's a 1/1 ranged unit, and everybody knows how deadly it can be to let your opponent keep a Heartseeker on the board. And Saberspine Tiger takes care of that very well. Katara is a great example. Your opponent turn 1 moves forward, drops Katara down. You going second, you have the opportunity to kill the Katara, leave yourself with a 3/1 body on the board that they have to deal with, and you get to block the center mana tile with the Saberspine Tiger. And, depending on what faction you're playing, maybe you play the Saberspine on the tile, and then you get to play a 1-drop or something. So plays like that can get you so much value. And that, again, that's not even really going through the full extensive list. Katara, Haraki Headhunter, which nobody really plays anymore, but again, it's a threat that scales. It's something that you don't want to have sitting on the board. Unbuffed Chakri Avatar is another example. So right away you can see Songhai gets completely blown out by player 2 opening up with Saberspine Tiger. It can also help you clear Shiro Puppy Dragon and Sojourner, which is a couple other very common cards that you see, especially right now in the meta. And these are all cards that have, again, very threatening on their own, potential to become threats, or they scale up, you see. And so Saberspine Tiger really lets anybody, especially new players, want to shut these cards down, because you don't want new players over and over again to get blown out by turn 1 Chakri Avatar they couldn't answer, turn 1 Katara, turn 1 double Katara that they couldn't answer, Heart Seekers, So it's almost like Saberspine Tiger keeps Songhai from wrecking new players super hard, when you put it that way. But again, it's just a really solid removal. And so we've gotten to this point where a lot of commonly played minions are 1-attack things. And that's what's allowing this to get so much value, because when you have that 3/1 body left on the board, you have to sacrifice another minion to it, essentially. Most minions, early mid-game are going to be like 2/3s or something, 2/3, 3/2. And so it's going to trade into that, eat another body, or you have to take that 3 damage to face. Your opponent has already gotten value on you by developing a body, possibly restricting your movement, destroying your 2-drop, your opening move, I should say, your 1-drop or your 2-drop, and then they potentially also deal 3 damage to you. And both of those scenarios are very unfavorable. I suppose you can weigh it depending on what type of deck you have in the matchup, but it's just that asking the person to, hey, you can give me another card, right? You basically discard a card to destroy the Saberspine Tiger in a way, or, you pay 3 HP to get this body out of the way. And right now the meta's really cutthroat, and you can't really ask that of the player. Typically, especially in high-level games, something like that ends up resulting in a loss. Taking the Saberspine Tiger to the face might not lose you the game as much, but especially if you're in against an aggro matchup, something like that is just so devastating. And so that's kind of where we're at right now with Saberspine Tiger. The other main issue with this card, and the reason it's been the cause of so many headaches in the past, is because it's super good with buffs. Buffs generally are, you're supposed to just play it on something preemptively to allow the minion to survive through certain kinds of removal or spell damage, or to have it be able to trade up into a large body that you can't deal with any other way, where you don't have a hard removal spell, so you buff the body and put it in front of you. So when they are forced to make that trade, because they don't want you to have a big minion on the board either, the buff sort of serves its purpose that way. Or if you have a minion that sticks on the board, your buff allows you to get lots of value out of that minion. You get a bigger face hit, or again, you get to trade up into something where your opponent plays a minion to block and thinks they're safe, right? And then the buff allows you to unexpectedly overcome that obstacle. But Saberspine Tiger allows you to get instant value out of buff spells. And I think that the reason this has been so problematic throughout the lifespan of the game is because a lot of the buffs in this game are designed to be very strong because they're by nature slow, right? And so getting instant value out of those cards, taking away the slowness, the setup of a buff spell, makes Saberspine Tiger you get so much value, especially buffs that give HP. It allows Saberspine Tiger to trade into even larger things and stick around, because you still have that buffed body sitting in front of you. If you hit Saberspine Tiger with, a really great example is Greater Fortitude, and it becomes a 5/4, trades into, a anything with 3 attack, then there's a 5/1 sitting on the board. And I hope you have a Ghost Lightning or a Blood Tier Alchemist or another body on the board to trade into it, because you don't want to take 5 damage to face with your general ever, really, right? In very rare cases it might be the proper play, but generally speaking, you don't want to get bursted for a fifth of your total HP. And then you had the whole thing where Saberspine Tigers just allowed Kara to completely take over the meta, where she would just stall the game and continuously buff the Tigers, because again, they could just get buffed, get buffed, get buffed. Something that was supposed to be slow, and you just drop your Kara's Bloodborne spell in its original incarnation was supposed to be like a late game tool where you were just buffing minions over and over again, and then you were dropping continuously larger and larger threats until your opponent could no longer deal with them. But the player base, being what it is, figured out that they can just use the buffs to get more value from opening gambit minions, which generally had lower stats, to balance out their effects and make them into decent enough bodies to still hang in the early mid game, and then build towards the inevitability factor of buffed Saberspine Tiger, double Saberspine Tiger. The other thing too is that Saberspine Tiger, because it costs 3, you can late game easily cast 2 of them in one turn, or 3 of them in one turn, theoretically, which it doesn't happen too often, but usually 2 of them is enough. So everybody, again, has access to a late game 6+ damage burst, which is really helpful, again, for new players. One other thing that I guess I wanted to touch on is people were saying, maybe we could nerf this card a little bit and see where it goes from there. The problem with Saberspine Tiger is that it's in such a precarious, I don't want to call it a sweet spot, but at least in a very precarious position where you can't really tweak any numbers on it, because it's just so perfectly, it's like so hard to describe how precarious this card is, right? You can't make it 2 mana, you can't make it 4 mana, you can't decrease its stats. It's either going to be broken or useless. So right now it's just the right amount of broken, I guess I mean to say, because after Duelyst, way back in the day, I don't know, new players most likely are going to be watching this video. Back in the day in Duelyst, you used to draw 2 cards at the end of your turn instead of 1. And what this did was, the metagame was completely different back then, where because you were drawing 2 cards per turn, you were forced to play 2 cards per turn, because Duelyst has such a small hand size. You don't want to start milling cards. But anyway, after they changed from 2 draw to just drawing 1 card at the end of the turn, in order to make up for the potential of players having less burst, right? Because you see less of your deck with this change. You have access to less of the cards in your deck. So they said, well, players are going to have less cards, so they're not going to have as much removal for big threats or minions they need to clear. They aren't going to have as much burst to close out games. So in order to counteract that, they made Saberspine Tiger a 4/1 stat line. And what happened is it made Magmar completely broken, because if you change Saberspine Tiger to just a 1 HP minion, so that it acts more like a removal spell where it's like a Phoenix Fire on a body, it makes factions with really strong buffs like Magmar, because of Dire Tide, Frenzy, and Greater Fortitude, they were able to super abuse this card. Greater Fortitude, again, was giving it +2 HP, allowed it to trade into stuff and still remain on the board. And so Greater Fortitude was leaving, let me see, it was a 4-1. You give it greater fortitude. It was like a 6-1 left over right after you traded into something. And then they had Dire Tide Frenzy, which had temporarily been made into a 1-mana spell as opposed to a 2-mana spell. And they ended up reverting both of those changes at the same time, pretty much. And so the debate was never resolved about whether it was actually Dire Tide Frenzy that was broken, or if it was the change of Saberspine Tiger to a 4-1 was the more broken aspect of that combo. Because it was basically like they had 6 War Beasts in their deck. And so that was just like one example of a balance nightmare that this card had caused in the past. But more, I wanted to bring up that example more to talk about why tweaking the stats on this card is so difficult. Because if you tweak its HP, factions that are able to grant HP benefit way more from this card, because they still get to do the old broken thing of trading into something and then keeping the body on the board. And if you nerf its attack, then it loses its ability to serve as removal, and then it might just be run in factions that are able to grant attack. An example might be if they made Saberspine Tiger into a 2-2, and it was just like a really bad version of Tuskbore. So Songhai wouldn't run it, obviously. And certain weird aggressive / tempo variants of Argion Highmane might, because it still gives you a decent way to get Holy Immolations in really key spots, and you still get to hit it with Roar. But even cards you think would combo really well with this card, like Boundless Courage, doesn't really see play. But again, that's more for like budget, I suppose. Obscuring Blow, I've actually run Saberspine Tiger with Obscuring Blow, and I suppose that's a way it could be run in Songhai. So it's like, if you tweak the stats on the card, again, it basically starts to benefit one faction over the other, where Saberspine Tiger is supposed to grant basically the same amount of semi-broken power to everybody, again, because it's a basic card that everybody has access to. And so, to, I guess, wrap up, I think I went over all the bullet points that I wanted to touch on in this video. Basically, why Saberspine Tiger has to be in the game, why it is the way it is, and why has it existed in its current form for so long. And also to touch on why it's starting to maybe cause a little bit of a headache right now because of the current meta. So thank you for tuning in. Let me know what you think of Saberspine Tiger. Should they just take it out of the game and maybe we just see what happens to the meta, what happens to newer players? Because again, this card has been the source of a lot of headaches, and I think that maybe by taking this card away, it would open up a lot of design space for like new, maybe even stronger buffs. But let me know what you think. Again, I just wanted to kind of get my thoughts out there, especially now while the Saberspine Tiger is sort of a topic of discussion at the moment. I will see you next time, and you have a good one.